Tony, tell us about this photograph here.
Again, it's Bob War Eagle. Just a mural that someone painted.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you who, but I just took a picture of it because of it stating where it was, and then too just with the two flags there.
Right. And FOB is Forward Operating Base.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's related to your specific job, right? So is that kind of the Forward Operating Base and then the Forward Observer?
No, Forward Operating Base is just another name for a smaller camp, really.
Okay.
You would have the bigger areas would have thousands of troops on them,
Yeah.
which they would usually call Camp or Camp Taji, things
Yeah.
like that. To where Forward Operating Base was more you were out in the front, you were within the city, you weren't on the outskirts, you were in the middle, and it's where you could react very quickly. The fight was literally right there.
Right there.
And you could get out to it.
I see what you
Usually they were really small, and not very many people were on them.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. And then what's going on in this photo here?
This is Kuwait.
Okay.
I want to say probably Camp Arifjan,
Okay.
or at least the Arifjan area. We had found a golf club, or somehow acquired a golf club
Mm-hmm.
back in Taji, and we put it in our bags when we were headed home, and we needed some stuff to do, and we were waiting for our flight,
Mm-hmm.
and we decided we'd pull the golf club out and go out in the desert and
There you go.
hit some golf balls. So we played a
Yeah.
game of golf with me and some buddies.
Yeah. So you're close to going home at this point.
Right. Yep. We're on our way home. We're probably days from flying out of Kuwait.
Now you did one 15-month deployment, had a year off, and then another year-long deployment. How long total did you spend in the Army?
In active, I was in for 4 years and 2 months, and then I did a 22-month stint with the Arkansas.
The Arkansas
Guard.
Okay. But Army active duty, so 4 years.
Mhm.
So over half of that, if I've got it right, over half you're deployed overseas.
27 months was deployment.
After the second deployment, had you decided, that's it, I'm done, I'm not gonna, re-up and get shipped back, or what was you thinking?
It was well before the second deployment. I
Really?
knew I
Okay.
knew pretty early on that it wasn't to say it like you hear it in the Army. It wasn't. The Army life was not for me.
Yeah.
It was. I went in at a old age, I guess you would say, for someone entering the Army. I was 30 years old when I
Okay.
entered.
Yeah.
I was married.
Yeah.
I had a house. I had a job. I had dogs.
Mhm. Yeah.
And to leave that and to know that was going to be the norm was just not something that.
Boy, that's
I saw
tough. I mean, that's tough on a family.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
It
mean,
was.
Wow.
It was. It was a very tough 4 years for my wife.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my parents and all, but more for my wife because we didn't have any kids, and she
Okay.
went from having somebody, all the time to basically living alone again for 4 years. So
Yeah.
she didn't follow me when I went to Fort Hood where I was stationed, stateside.
Sure.
She would come and visit, and of course I would come home and visit, but it was very limited. So we were pretty much separated for the full 4 years and 2 months.
Wow, that
So.
is, yeah, that's So, I mean, how long into your enlistment was it pretty clear to you that this was going to be a one enlistment deal, like the second week of boot camp? Or something like
Actually,
that, or-
probably before I enlisted, I probably knew.
Oh, really?
It wasn't
Okay.
something that I wanted to do as a career.
Right.
I knew enough about it, and I knew what come about with being in the Army,
Yeah.
and it just wasn't the lifestyle that I wanted, but it was something that I wanted to do. And,
Why did you want to do it?
there were a couple of reasons. One, I was just kind of in a bad place with who I was and what I had accomplished.
Mm.
I was felt like I hadn't had a career. I hadn't really had anything that, made me,
That was
I don't want to
moving
say
you along,
special.
or-
Right.
yeah,
I just kind of felt like I was going nowhere as far as career-wise and just even with, my life and all. And I had tried back whenever I was in high school. I tried to join the Navy, and long story short, I got medically pulled from that for just a blister on my foot. But
Wow.
it was a story that, probably had lots of God in it, because probably wasn't the best time for me and probably wasn't the best move for me. So I'm glad that it didn't happen, but I always kind of felt like I let myself down and other people down and my country down by not continuing with that pursuit. And then I just felt like my generation never had to, my generation was pretty fortunate in conflicts and bad things happening that you felt like your call to your country was there.
Right.
There wasn't really any during my, I was right on the end of Desert Storm. I was too young for Desert Storm. And then while I was the age that you would typically go into the Army, it was pretty peaceful.
Right, yeah.
And I just felt like, that was something I needed to do and wanted to do for myself.
What
and
year did you go in then?
2006. February of
2006.
2006.
I mean, things are pretty tough in 2006. I mean, were you tracking
Yep.
the Iraq War?
Yeah, I was, and that's, I think, kind of what pulled me was, if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it. Wasn't the smartest decision, because I think just about any veteran will tell you, war's not like the movies. You think it's going to be that, but you find out real quick that it's not. So there was a part of me that, I wanted that adventure. I wanted that adrenaline rush. I wanted what come with that, but I found out real quick that, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want any part of that. So
What did your wife think about this move to going in the Army at the time?
I think she was, at the beginning, I think she saw how excited I was, and that I felt like I found something that was good for me. I found something that was going to make me feel like, I was not just somebody drawing a check and going home every day. But again, once it all set in and the deployment orders come out, and watching the news and things like that, it was type of thing that kind of hit home and was probably more like a, what have we done?
Kind of the reality sets in.
Yeah, it was whenever I was going to my ship out, I went to do my physical and got my MOS, and I think it was 30 days. I was on delayed entry for 30 days, right at 30 days, and everything had been not just super hot over there. Things were kind of cooling down. You wasn't even hearing that much about it. Good things were starting to happen. And when I woke up the morning that I was shipping out, there was a guy that was in my motel room with me that was a former Marine, and he was going back in the Army. And we both woke up to catch the bus, go down and eat breakfast, and we turned on the TV for whatever reason. And it was the day that, I can't remember the event name, but I'm sure it has a name, but they had bombed a big mosque over there, and it was a big bombing.
Oh, yeah.
And he had been over there prior, and we both stopped what we were doing, getting ready and all that, and we knew what we were fixing to do, get on that bus and take you to the plane. And he told me, he's like, it's going to heat up again. It's fixing to heat back up over there with this event. This was a really, this wasn't this was a major event. And I guess I kind of sunk then. Because I guess I was kind of hoping that things would stay the way they were, and you would get that little bit of action maybe. But it definitely went the other direction.
Was there a moment? I mean, it sounds like that was a little bit of a reality check right there.
Right.
Was there a moment in country? You know, when
Um,
you like realize, wow, this is for real.
yeah, we were coming in from Kuwait to Baghdad, and we'd been in Baghdad for just 2 or 3 days. And from Kuwait, you flew C-130s into Baghdad. Usually, you stayed in Baghdad for 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, waiting for your flight to your base that you were going to, your camp. Uh, we were headed to Camp Taji. Uh, Lots of guys were coming back. Basically, you'd have Chinooks bring a group in that was going home, and you would have a group going back out to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
And we were waiting in the flight line that night. Hadn't really seen any of Iraq. It was just like a big airport at that point.
Yeah.
And the Chinook would land behind the building that we would form up in front of, and you would walk through some barricades, big tall T-barriers, and you would go and get on the flight. Well, you waited for the group that was coming off the flight to get in formation away from the flight so you could go by and get on the plane. And the group that was getting off come by, and they had 2 or 3 individuals with bags over their head, and they were in the traditional clothing that the
Yeah.
uh,
That the Iraqi men
Iraqi
wear.
would wear.
Yeah.
And the ones you see on the news is, terrorist or, just
Yeah, sure.
whatever is kind of related to that. And
Yeah.
they come out of the plane and pass by us, and we watched them. And of course, they're handcuffed and their feet are cuffed, and they've got armed guards just right on them. Who they were to this day, I don't know. They didn't let us see them. Of course, that wasn't just for us not being able to see them, or actually, it probably wasn't for us to not be able to see them at all. It was for them to not know
Not
where
know
they
they
were
were.
or what was going on, or be
Yeah.
able to go back if they were
Sure.
to escape, or if they were to ever be released,
Yeah.
to not know, exactly how things worked. So,
Yeah.
but to see that and to know, and I think that's whenever I first said, this isn't a game anymore. This is
Yeah, these
this
guys
is
are
for real.
They're
Yeah.
just not actors on TV.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
you could tell the guys that were with them were not. It wasn't just a normal target. It was they were serious about what was
Probably
going to
being
happen
taken,
to
being
these guys. And-
interrogated somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
They were taking them, and to take them through that, they would usually you could do that stuff on your smaller post if it wasn't anything, I would say major, but they were flying them in with them. So
These must have been important.
right,
targets.
they were
Yeah.
pretty high value
Yeah,
targets. So.
yeah.
But yeah, that's probably whenever I first said, this
This is for real.
isn't, we're not playing anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So your job was forward observer. So in Iraq, what did that actually entail? What was, just explain that job to someone who doesn't know anything about it.
Well, you have different entities. Again, I was at a brigade level. You have
Okay.
company level, and then you would have platoon level that would go out with groups and actually be out with the infantry. They were the ones that would, if you got a call for fire coming in on radio, that observer would be the one you would talk to.
Okay.
It would go through the company. The company would then send it to the brigade, and the brigade would check everything, make sure that the fire mission could take place, make sure there wasn't any friendlies in the area, make sure there wasn't any high-value targets that we didn't want to hit, make sure that there wasn't any secret missions going on, because a lot of times only us would know, only the brigade level would know if there was a secret mission going on. The companies wouldn't know that.
So let me just work it out. And so let's say you've got guys out on patrol. They say we need, maybe there's a firefighter or something.
Mhm.
We have some guys in a building over here. Firefight's not going to take care of it, so we need artillery.
Right.
So they call in for artillery.
Right.
That gets back to you guys,
Mhm.
and then you need to go through this process of looking at the area. Is there a mosque in the area?
Right.
Is there all this?
School, hospital.
Yeah, the rules of engagement.
right.
All this stuff. How long in the best case? How long would that process take?
Well, let me back up just a little bit.
Mhm.
There was another thing that we did, which were just fire missions. Fire mission being, if our radars picked up incoming artillery from enemy fire,
Yeah.
and it was confirmed, which being we would look at a computer screen and you would see the entry and where where it took off from, and where it was
Yeah.
shot from, and where it landed.
Yeah.
You'd call if they called and said that was a confirmed explosion in that area. Then you would go back to where it come from, and that would set your fire mission up. You would fire upon that
Okay.
position.
And did the rules of engagement allow firing on it? I mean, even
Right.
if
The rules of
hypothetically
engagement
came
were
from a
different for
mosque.
that. Right.
So even if it came
Now
from
a mosque
you-
a mosque was typically off limits. I don't know that we ever fired on a mosque.
Okay.
They were typically off limits just for the
Okay.
political.
Sure.
Uh,
Let's say, just hypothetically, you track one of those, a mortar round or something coming from a neighborhood,
mhm.
right? Then confirmed explosion. We know where the fire came from. Rules of engagement allow just hitting it right away, or do you still have to do
Yes,
that?
if it was a counterfire, where we were shooting at something that shot at us, typically, like I said, the rules of engagement were a little bit narrower then.
Yeah.
You didn't have to do the same as you would if you were doing an actual fire mission, to where
Okay.
what we would call a pre-planned target, or a fire mission coming in from an individual, a forward observer out on the ground.
Yeah. I mean, one of the challenges is, I'm guessing, is that the insurgents knew what the rules of engagement were.
Oh yeah,
So they could take advantage of
Oh,
it.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, and they did. That
Yeah.
was they had tactics that we had. You were asking about the time. We had 6 minutes. Our max time that we could take from getting the acquisition to
Mm.
actually giving the fire command was 6 minutes. Typically, we had really good guns. We shot with the First Cav's 182
Mhm.
artillery, and their piece was a Paladin and a 155 Paladin, and those guys it was a tracked artillery piece
Mhm.
on a turret. Those guys they were the best that I ever worked
Yeah.
with. We worked with lots of different groups, but ours, the 182s,
Mhm.
were definitely some of the best and quickest. And usually we would, we'd get them out in 2 or 3 minutes. They would be able to fire back in
And
2 or
would
3
you
minutes.
do, I mean, I guess you have different kinds of things going on. I mean, did you have many instances where, guys are calling in for fire support and you had no idea they were out there? Or usually these are missions that you're aware of?
Yep,
You know
we would
that they're
track
out
them.
there.
We would track them, and that was the
Okay.
whole. Our talk was. It's basically kind of like going into a big sports bar, if you will. You've just got screens everywhere, and each piece, the brigade piece is there. So you have your aviation, you would have your artillery, you would have your infantry unit, you would have your medics, you would have your JAG there. Every piece is there, and if somebody's doing something, they let everybody know. We got
Okay.
troops in that area.
Yeah.
And you would go through briefings in the morning, and you would know what missions were going to take
So you
place
could
that
do
day.
the intel ahead of time
Right.
and know in this area.
Right.
So did you have drones, like feeding video back to you?
A lot of times we had drones, we had helicopters, we had Air Force had their pilots would fire for us sometimes. If we were dropping really big stuff, we would work with the Air Force pilots. And if they were up there and the pilots were, I don't want to say bored, because I'm sure they never got bored, but
Yeah.
if they were up there and able to, they could put their cameras on for us too. And we actually had the Air Force was in the talk with us,
Yeah.
so we could speak if we ever needed some eyes on and we didn't have any of our people there. We could call the Air Force and ask them, hey, do y'all have a plane up that would be able to get to this spot? Of course, they could get there
And get
quick,
video back to
and
you.
if they weren't busy,
Yeah.
they would go to that area and
So
show us.
were you able to see on the screen then sometimes when these firefights are going on?
Yep.
Wow, you're able
Yeah.
to see this.
Yep.
And then I guess somebody can direct the drones over, you can get a closer view of what
Right.
the insurgents are up to.
Right. There were a lot of fire missions that we did that were, there was no troop involved other than the drone. Everything took place within the talk between the drone operators and the artillery pieces.
Yeah.
There was no one,
It's-
on the ground even near the incident.
And then so sometimes I guess you can see the artillery that you send, you can see it hit on
Yes.
on camera.
Yep.
I mean, so this doesn't sound the way it's going to sound like a dumb question, but I mean, did it sometimes feel like some kind of elaborate video game or something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, I
almost,
mean,
really?
when you when you really sit back and you looked at it, that's what it really looked like.
Yeah.
It didn't look like anything that you would think of as at least me before joining what I would think that a war room would look like.
Yeah. So
But
that's pretty high tech.
very high tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything was computer. It taught computer. Now there were times where our computers would go down. We'd have generator issues. We would have, there may be somebody, fired on the generator and the generator happened to get hit or just whatever. I really don't ever remember our generators getting hit, but there may be a company that got mortar attacked and their computer systems went down, and it would all go old school to where it was all radio, and you were doing the call for fire just with the radio and your observer that was out there.
Yeah.
But typically it was run through the computers and
Yeah. So I was talking to a couple weeks ago. I was talking to a forward observer in Vietnam, and sometimes he's calling in missions for something that's quarter mile, half mile away, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He knows something's going on over there, but those people are far away and they're not a direct threat to him.
Mm-hmm.
But he still calls in a fire mission on them. And then sometimes he calls in fire missions because they're engaged in a firefight.
Right.
And now it's much closer. He said his preference was to call in fire missions on people who are actually shooting at them, because there's a sense that me and the guy next to me, we're threatened.
Right.
And so we're going to respond. He said psychologically it was harder to, or maybe he means this in retrospect as he looks back on it. In retrospect, sort of the memory is harder of calling in missions on people who, although they were a threat to him in general, in kind of an abstract sense because they were the enemy, but they weren't a direct threat to him. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, as a forward observer, and here you are in a room, you're looking at these screens, you're watching this stuff play out on video. In one respect, it sounds easy because no one's shooting at you. You're not driving by improvised explosive devices and so on. But I mean, there must be a sort of a psychological toll as well.
And sometimes they were firing on us. There were times where we confirmed our own. We would see the acquisition and we would hear the explosion. It would be right there.
What do you mean the acquisition? What do you mean?
When the acquisition come up on the radar, you would see it and you would watch it, and of course you're looking, you're like, wow, that's real close. And then about that time, boom, yeah.
Really?
And about that time, you hear the boom, and you don't have to go through you confirmed it yourself. You start the counterfire process right then.
Yeah.
So there were times where it was directly fired on you.
Yeah. Gosh, even there, that's kind of this weird video game thing, though, huh? You're watching this,
you're still, everything is still, it's real life, but it's through a computer instead of, you just seeing it.
Did it make any difference? I guess I'm just interested in the psychology of this job, because.
I guess a lot of it would have to do with the individual. I was an individual that I felt that there was, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any hiccup that caused someone not to go home. That was
one of your guys,
right.
Yeah.
One of our guys.
Because those guys, I mean, when you're in a situation they're on a firefight or they've been ambushed or something, I mean, they really are depending on you.
Right, right. And that was the last thing that I didn't want to. So I didn't want to be a part of a mess up that would hinder them from coming home. I did not want to have to live with that. I didn't want to think about that. I would, in many cases, have rather it been me directly, because then if you make a mistake, it's on you. But it's never just you, so there's always others involved.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess when you actually heard the rounds and you knew that, hey, more are coming, and our talk was probably one of the most sought after. If they could pick any building on that post, they would have wanted to one of them would have been our talk, because
what does the talk stand for again?
Tactical operation.
Right.
Center, and
Tactical Operations Center.
and I think that's what TOC stands
That
for.
ma-
I've
yeah,
done.
makes sense. Yeah.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
But you know, that's where the colonel is. That's where the JAG is. That's where, I mean, all your brass is there,
Yeah.
and that's the brains of the entire brigade. As far as if you take that out, then you've got a bunch of companies with no
Yeah.
higher echelon
Yeah.
that are all of a sudden, you know. So that would be the top building that they would want to take. Now, it wasn't like that building was any different than any other building there. So there were, again, when they fired, they weren't pinpoint accurate by any means.
Sure.
And they may try one coordinates one day and see if they hear of anything around the TOC getting hit. And they're like, no, we need to move this thing because we're not hitting
Sure.
close to the TOC, so let's
Yeah.
move this way.
Yeah.
The airfield, they would go after the airfield a lot because you know
Sure.
they want to take out some helicopters or
Okay.
create havoc to where maybe they slow down the
Sure.
air operation, things
Yeah.
like that. So there were times where they would try to shoot at us, and we were shooting back with us being the target.
The target.
But
yeah.
typically it was outside in the streets or in the fields where guys were.
Was there, so you've got different kinds of missions. So one might be like a planned mission, like we know that
Yep.
there are some insurgents.
Right.
They've got a bomb factory here, something like that. So we're going to hit that, and so you plan up and work that out, something like that. But then there are these other things where maybe guys are out on patrol, they get ambushed, something like
Right.
that. Does that happen?
Right. Oh
Get
yeah.
those calls in.
Yep.
Um,
Lots
I
of
mean-
illumination rounds where guys just needed to see. They didn't know what was out there, so they wanted to see what was out there
yeah.
better. So we would do illumination rounds for them.
Okay. When you've got the guys on the ground who are either in a firefight or think they might be in a firefight pretty soon, was that just a more intense experience than when, okay, we've got a planned thing, we're going to
Oh,
do
yeah.
it in 90 minutes,
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is more immediate, right?
Right.
Like,
You're when you start hearing medevacs come in, it really gets to you. It really, for one, it makes you mad, but two, it makes you feel like you let them down. It feels like, I always ask the question, why am I not out there calling this in? But it just, when you knew people were actually being harmed or had a real good chance of being harmed, you just kind of tried to put yourself in that.
Sure.
And, all you wanted to do was go home. All you wanted to do was see your kid. All you wanted to do was, go fishing. And, you wanted to do everything you could to make sure that person made it back so that they could do that.
Yeah.
You didn't want to be a part of them not being able to do that.
Yeah.
So it was always a lot more intense when you knew that there were people that were being harmed or,
Sure.
had a good chance of being harmed.
Yeah. Now you mentioned in a different discussion, and the first deployment was much more intense because it's at this time in the war when things are very intense, and then the second deployment things were more calm. In this first deployment, how many missions would you guess you would have in a typical week?
There was a time there right at the surge when we were doing the push, and I want to say we broke a lot of records for, I don't know if it was just the Cav division or we made some write-ups with how many rounds we were shooting, but
Wow.
there would be a month, we may shoot 600-700 rounds,
Wow.
and that's 155. That's
Mhm.
now there were months before and months after where the actual big surge was in
Yeah.
that you might shoot 2 or 3 counterfire missions a week, and then you might shoot 10 or so pre-planned targets just to keep them honest.
Sure.
Just to let them know, hey, we still
Yeah.
are out there and we still can
Yeah.
bring this to you if you make
Right.
us.
Now, so you're part of an elaborate system. What was your specific job? I mean, like, you've got, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, like request,
Mhm.
step, the gun is actually fired. What's
Right.
your specific job in that chain?
But we received the fire mission,
Okay.
or we either built the fire mission. If it was a
Okay.
pre-planned, we built it. We actually got the request from whoever the landowner was. and they said, hey, we want to shoot this spot, it would go through the colonel and our warrant officers and just our major, and he would look at it and see if it was something he wanted to do or not. If he approved it, we'd build the target, send it down to the guns, tell them the times. As long as there wasn't a counterfire going on at that time, you know, it was pretty, they were already ready whenever we sent the pre-planned target into them.
Yeah.
If it was a counterfire, you know, it was something that was more, it could happen anytime. You know, the counterfires could happen.
Sure, yeah.
Now, we kind of had historical data on when it typically happened, and we could watch the acquisitions come in, and we could tell you pretty much 2 or 3 months in, you could kind of tell as soon as it popped off if you needed to really get busy and start working, or if you could just kind of, nah, that's not real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a bird flying, or
Oh, right.
that's
Just
it's
figuring out
picking up
what
dust
you're
or
looking at
something.
on radio.
Right, you could see where it was coming from
Sure.
and where it was going, and they're like,
Yeah.
they're not shooting out there. There's nothing out there.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And then there were others where when it popped up, you didn't even wait for to get the acquisition, or you didn't wait to get the confirmation. You knew,
You knew.
let's go on and work this one up because we're probably fixing to get a call. And our job was you would call the landowner that was landing in, and you would say, have y'all got any reports of, you know, an explosion in this area? And they would go and check with their grounds, and they would either come back, that's a negative confirmation, or that's a positive confirmation.
And then from there, then you communicate with the guys who
We
are
would
actually at the gun.
Right, we would communicate with the guns. We would send the fire mission to them. Typically ours were Uniform Fox missions, and they would have 4 numbers after it, and you would send that mission to them. They would pull it up in their computer. It would tell the coordinates. It would tell, you know, everything they needed to know, and then they would do their piece of how much powder, what type of round. You know, we
Sure.
would tell them what we wanted,
Yeah.
and then they would call us back and tell us that they were ready to fire when you were. And then from that point on, it was on us. Sometimes we chose just from our sergeant that was on. He could choose if it was something like a counterfire. He didn't have to get. You would have the battle captain, which was over the TOC at that time, and he would give you confirmation on whether or not you could fire it or not. There were other times where it was in a spot that was kind of iffy. It was right on the gray area or within what might be against the rules of engagement for that time, and you would have to get the colonel to approve that.
I
So
see.
there were times where we'd have to go get the
Yeah.
colonel.
What was your
and have them
maximum?
go.
What was your maximum effective range?
Probably 15, 16, 17 miles.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
probably about
Yeah.
the longest that we
Yeah.
would shoot.
And then what was the work schedule like 12 hours on, 12 hours off, or?
The first deployment, the sergeants that I had were real good about trying to get you 8-hour shifts.
So 8 on, 16 off? kind of
Right.
thing? Yeah.
But now your 16 off would not always be. You would have to do things in between there. Sometimes you might get pulled on extra duty.
Right.
You might have to do a mail call. You might have to do, you know, if you were changing out something, an air conditioner or something, and they needed somebody to help carry
Sure, yeah.
things, you know, you might get pulled on that.
Yeah.
And then usually once you got going, somebody was either on R&R, somebody was, you know, they were sick, they were hurt, and you'd have to pull some extra
Good
duty.
for them.
And then you would do things down at the company level, which it was a brigade, but it was what we called our company. And there may be times where you would have to go down and help clean something down there,
Okay, yeah.
or
Yeah.
if they needed to do some things in the armory room, you know, they may call you and,
Sure.
you know, ask you to come
Yeah.
out and help.
And
But
it's a
for the most
7-day
part, they
week,
were, right, yeah, it
just
was,
rolls,
we,
rolls
the
through.
first deployment, I got, the first day I got off was the day that I flew out from my R&R, which was, I was about 8 months in.
Mhm.
And then I got 1 day off that year. That entire 15 months, I got 1 day off. That was an
Yeah.
actual day off to where I
Right.
woke up that day.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, it was the longest day of my life probably,
Mhm.
and I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, what am
Oh,
I
yeah.
gonna do with this
What am I
day?
gonna do with all this time
So,
off?
right,
That's
so I was kind of glad after you had, you know, you'd do anything before that to get a day off, and then after you got it, you were kind of like, don't ever give me one of those again.
Not a whole lot to do.
No, let me go to work and get this
Yeah,
over
I
with.
understand that. All right, we'll stop this one here and then we'll have, just do one
Sure.
more discussion.
Sounds
Right,
good.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.